live show from the DKNY storefront window at 420 West Broadway. For 8 weeks, I'm interviewing contemporary female artists in New York City about their recipes for art and process. And today I have the awesome Karley Sciortino. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yeah.
Woo! My long ago Italian, sort of. Sitting next to me to have a conversation about what Karley does and what her perspective on working and living in New York City is. For those of you who don't know, Karley is the author of Vogue's Breathless column on dating and relationships. She also began her own website, slutever.com, at age 21 in London, where she uses the blog as a place to discuss issues of sex and relationships in the modern age. She has also worked on an ongoing web documentary series for Vice and contributed to other publications such as Apartmento, Dazed, and Purple. You have fans on the sidewalk already.
Hello. I think those are just confused people.
I think they're also confused people. That's what all fans are, confused people. Anyway, I'm so stoked to have you on. Thank you for joining.
Yeah,
thank
you.
You know, not a long time ago, 4 years ago, I was the creative director at the Museum of Sex over here in Manhattan. Yeah. And I am always so curious to hear other women who have worked in the industry, who are interested in it, and how you define what it is that you do. Because I know I always confronted, they're like, well, what does that mean, Emily? And I'm like,
Yeah, I've started to over-intellectualize the spiel that I give to people, because if you're just like, I write about sex, people are like, whore, you know what I mean? I'm talking specifically about my parents, but I tend to say now that I write about sexuality and its intersection with pop culture and life in general, because I think that sounds good. But I also think that that's accurate. So the goal of my website, and I would say most of my writing, what I do, is just to really instigate a progressive and open, frank, and funny dialogue around sexuality, specifically female sexuality, because I think it's something that, there is an increasing conversation around, but it's not always, and it hasn't always been maybe the right conversation.
Yeah. How has it changed today? What was it and what is it now?
Well, I think that finally we are at a place where we are increasingly respecting female sexual autonomy and female sexual pleasure. I think for so long the conversation around sex was, we taught women that sex was something that you give up and that men get, or sex was a tool, or sex was something that you had to save because in some way your purity was a virtue, and that it was like a gift that you gave to people. And I think that that's a really negative way to think about it, even when you think of the term losing your virginity as if losing, it's a negative kind of. And I think that we've started to have more conversations around female pleasure. Having an active sexuality as a woman isn't necessarily considered a negative thing to everyone anymore.
Yeah, it's really interesting when I see the landscape of even advertising, having conversations like this. I think it becomes there's so much more possibility, number one. What I'm also curious about is on the flip side, we always talk about things like losing your virginity, right? Oh, that's a bad thing. But are there good things about it? What do you think? How could we rephrase that? Could there be a new word in life instead of losing your virginity? How should we be celebrating it? And if so, what would we call it?
Yeah, I guess it would be good if we just said, beginning your sexual life.
This is some new spiritual wave that's gonna happen. I saw this really funny video that you made with Jackass, I think.
Oh yeah, Johnny Knoxville.
Yeah. Which is totally hilarious, and I have to compliment you too on your acting abilities. Or maybe that wasn't acting, but can you tell me what it was?
I was really nervous. So I did part of the documentary series I make for Vice. Sometimes we would do sort of satirical sex ed videos. So it's kind of looking at sexuality, but from a slightly sarcastic maybe perspective. So we did this spoof. I did it with Johnny Knoxville, who was as his bad grandpa character, and we went to a tantric sex workshop, and the goal being to fool them into thinking that this really, really old, creepy man was in a tantric sex workshop, and that I was just also randomly there and was partnered with him and felt really uncomfortable.
Were they real people in the class, or?
Yeah, definitely there was real people in the class, and one of the girls was really trying to save me. She was like, "Are you okay?"
He kind of looks like Terry Richardson too, but old.
Yeah. Some people definitely recognized him though, so it kind of gave it away, but he's so funny.
Yeah, he is so funny.
It's not really an enlightened idea.
It's kind of a current idea, but still true. Do you ever get scared or nervous in this kind of work?
Not really. I mean, I guess sometimes you can get defensive. Like, I'm sure, did you feel like that working for the Museum of Sex? Sometimes it feels like you have to justify what you do. People, I think, for a long time have considered sexuality and, you know, romance and dating a girl topic, like something that girls care about, and, you know, girly being synonymous with insignificant or not intellectual or not weighty. And I think I had insecurity when I first started writing about it, because it was almost like I had to justify writing about sex, you know, and I would say, well, I'm really writing about like the psychology behind fringe sexual behaviors, and you know, and because you can't just say I write about dating. Meanwhile, dating is something that people care about. It's pretty significant in people's lives. So I think that the problem is that we associate this with something that girls care about. It's often sort of ghettoized into the female section of a website.
Yeah, that's true, but it is the most universal topic. Like, we're here because two people, most likely of not the same gender, somehow figured out how to connect in an interesting way. Do you think that there's, like, in this landscape of gender fluidity, and I think I can even hear myself be like, how do I talk around this, right? What does it mean to be a female right now?
I think, weirdly, you know, sometimes it can feel political, which is weird. I think that's something that men have, and also often white people take for granted, is that, you know, your presence is like the default or the norm, and then sometimes when you're a woman doing something, or a person of color doing something, it's like sort of by default politicized, even in a way that you don't want it to be. So sometimes, you know, you're interviewed or you are making a documentary series or whatever, and people say, like, what is it like to be doing this as a woman? Like, how does it feel to be a woman doing a thing? And you're not, you know, you want to be like, sometimes you just want to drop that adjective. You just want to be like, why can't I just be a person doing a thing? Why do I always have to be like a woman writer or a woman filmmaker? And not that you want to reject it, because you sometimes, you know, I'm really proud to be a woman, and of course, but sometimes you don't always want it to come first. Yeah,
let the work come first and me second. Well, how did you start getting into this? What's your genesis story?
It's, I guess, like a vaguely unconventional one. I moved to London when I was 17 to study, to go to a theater school.
We are now full circle in our own storefront stage.
I know. Kind of embarrassing in hindsight. I wanted to do acting and playwriting, and then I dropped out after a semester because I was like, wow, acting students are really annoying. And I moved into this sort of squatted commune because I didn't have any money, and I, you know, met these artists who were all living in these abandoned buildings and weren't paying any rent. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I was like, well, that seems like a good way to live rent-free. And then I fell in with this crowd there was about 15 of us living in this abandoned hostel, and it was just an amazing education for me, coming from a small town in upstate New York with, like, you know, just a bunch of straight religious white people, you know. So I was suddenly with people from all over the world, like everything from sort of homeless families from Romania coming through, and like asylum seekers from Iran, or like a lot of queer people, artists, musicians, etc. And then I started writing a blog that was really just about my life, because I sort of had like the vague foresight to be like, this is a weird situation to be in. And that's really how I just started writing it, intentioned for it to be read by my friends and the people that were in the house with me. Yeah. And then it sort of slowly found an audience. And then when it found an audience, I was like, maybe I should keep doing this, and that blog was Slut Ever. So it wasn't actually a sex blog at the beginning, although I did end up giving it a quite sexy title. Maybe I intuitively knew.
This was the path to follow.
Yeah.
What kept you on that path? Like, what made you go further and further into it? Sounds like the origin story was not specifically about sex, or even, but more so about human behavior. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I'm gonna steal that.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I've always been really interested in people. I've also just sort of found it easy to talk about sex. Like, I haven't had a hang up about it. I guess it's hard to explain. I mean, you can probably say the same thing. Like,
Yeah.
did you learn to be sort of sexually open, or was it just a curiosity?
I think I know for myself it was curiosity. How do people work? Why are they acting like this? Like, similar, I think, too. I've always had a deep curiosity of how people work, what motivates them, and then there are like intricacies and weirdnesses in sexuality that comes out in fetishes, you know, all of these things, and they are so taboo in culture. And I think repressing that ultimately just leads us to more screwed up behavior. You know, not being able to have forums to talk about it, for sure.
Totally. And I think I was a journalist, you know, after my blog became a little bit more known, I started getting journalistic jobs, and I was writing about culture, and I, you know, liked interviewing people. And then because I was interested and had a curiosity about sexuality, then it became, you know, for my blog, I would interview people, but I would interview people who, you know, worked in the sex industry, or porn stars, or people who had a weird fetish. And same thing, like, why do you do this? And what is the psychology behind, you know, having an abduction fantasy or something? And then the blog sort of by default became a sex blog because that was where my curiosity was taking me. But it wasn't really, from the beginning, it wasn't like, I think sometimes when people say you have a sex blog, they assume that you're just like blogging your blowjobs or something. And like, sometimes I do that, but like that wasn't the goal or like the primary focus.
Yeah. How did it, I mean, this is, I'm sure, the question everyone asks, but how did it affect your dating life?
Interestingly, at the beginning, it actually really negatively affected it because I had a long-term boyfriend at the time who I started dating when I was 18. So we ended up we'd been dating for 3 years when I started the blog. So to suddenly have this shift where I was talking about sexuality and you know, talking about our relationship a little bit, and we had met when we were really, really young, and he was a virgin, and I think he just was like, this is too much. And
yeah.
I remember breaking up and him saying, you will never be able to find a boyfriend who's gonna be able to tolerate this. I know, and at 21 I was like, is that true? But then the reality is that everyone I met going forward met me as someone who already did that.
Right.
So,
yeah.
And it's kind of a great filter, you know, like, as working at the Museum of Sex, it's the same thing. Like, if a guy's like, ew, slut, you're like, cool, I can eliminate you as an option.
Check off. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
What else do you like to talk about? I mean, I'm sure that, like, this is the brand, this is now the career, but do you have other, like, career aspirations, or what are really some deep interests of yours that you'd also like to expand on?
Yeah, well, I've started to do more screenwriting, actually. I wrote a movie, which is sort of, I guess, in pre-production now. And I just...
Awesome!
Yeah, and I just wrote another one. That was like 3 years ago. And I just wrote another one, and I feel like this is where... Maybe it's because it's new, but this is where I really want to focus. I mean, I just like telling the stories of people, but, you know, not necessarily... These sort of look at wider relationships and what it means to be a person my age living in the world and like navigating life and sexuality. So it's kind of, I still want to be telling stories, and I still want to be telling stories about people and women specifically, but yeah, I can get a bit boring to just talk about one subject all the time, as expansive as sex is. You know, I always thought I would run out of ideas for my column. And it's been 3 years, and I really haven't run out of ideas, which amazes me.
That might be a lifelong journey. What are some of the more interesting columns that you've written? Standout gold star moments.
one of the ones that got the most hate comments, which I always feel like is a good barometer.
Oh yeah, my grandpa used to say this: get in the papers no matter what.
Yeah.
Like, either going to jail or you've like won the Nobel Prize. It's good all around. I
Yeah,
don't-
just
that's
attention.
not advice for anyone else in the world, but
It was a recent one, actually. It was Would You Sleep with a Republican? And I really liked that one because people are like, this is trash. But, you know, I think that was a sort of light and funny way to put it. But I was, you know, interviewing people about whether they would sleep with a Republican and if Republicans are more boring or in bed or more kinky. But really what it's looking at is, you know, I try to like hide the deeper questions sometimes under sort of colloquial fun language, but yeah, it's looking at, is political affinity a deal breaker in you know,
Yeah.
a relationship, and like how important is it that you have the same values as someone if you're going to start a life with them. So that is really what it's about. But people are like, this is bullshit, like who cares? Why?
would you sleep with a Republican? The gold question of the day.
I don't think I would. Well, this is what I was trying to figure out, because I was like, I probably would sleep with Paul Ryan because I think he's really hot. But then it's like, can I actually sleep with someone who actively like votes against the women's right to choose, you know, an abortion? It's kind of, you'd feel like guilty.
Yeah, it's a whole equation.
Yeah.
There's not just like super nice suit walking down the street.
I know.
I mean, that's part of it, sure.
I interviewed Nina Hartley about it, who's the sort of legendary 80s porn star and sex educator. And she was like, unfortunately I have, but I met them at sex parties and they weren't wearing anything and we didn't have much conversation and I just didn't know.
Blind eyes turned away or
Yeah.
on. That said, you just brought up sex education. What role do you think, I mean, it sounds like you lived your education. I look around at the world, specifically in America, and there really isn't that much sex ed. What's your thought on it as a discipline, or where can we find our best education for that?
I know. I think it's really sad that there is such a lack of sex education in this country. I mean, and also so much of the sex ed is preventative. So it's like not focused at all on the joys that sex can bring you. So it's not, okay, so you're going to have sex. Here's how to make it good. Here's how to make it safe. Here's, you know, how to have pleasure. It's more just like, these are the dangers. And then we also teach women, don't give it up because then people won't respect you. And it's like this weird, it's all about, it's like scare tactics. And that's the sex education that I got. I mean, I grew up in upstate New York in a really religious, conservative town, and, you know, parents petitioned because they didn't want us to be taught how to put on a condom on a banana. It was crazy. So I think that I see it in myself all the time sometimes even. You know, I think I've educated myself around sexuality, but then I'm someone who grew up watching pornography. I learned how to have sex from porn. Sometimes I even have to decondition myself now. You know, in small ways. Like sometimes I feel like I had a revelation like a year ago. I was like, wow, I'm definitely more performative because of the amount of pornography I watched growing up. I'm very pro porn, but it's weird. I was like, I can see in myself things that I learned from that in the absence of some sort of more comprehensive sex education.
Yeah. How cool that you're going into media now.
Yeah, I guess so.
You can make all that.
Yeah, that's true. And I think like this is why it's cool that, you know, going back to what you said at the beginning, that we're starting more of these conversations. And then there's more outlets, whether it's, you know, women writing about sex or Amy Schumer or the Museum of Sex Right. These conversations being had is a form of sex ed for people. You know, everyone has the internet. I think women and men are educating themselves, but they have to seek it out.
Yeah. You know, something I've always questioned is, like, talking about pornography, can it be a form of art? And I think it's a really polarizing question to ask, and I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
Well, I remember one time I asked Stoya, the porn star, that. I was like, do you consider yourself a performer or an artist? She was like, porn is not art. Porn is not art. Oh my God. And I thought that was kind of funny because it was like from the source. I think that, you know, certain pornography can be more artful than others. I'm a fan of Bruce LaBruce, who definitely makes pornographic art films. So I think that there's a crossover. If there's like, write a Venn diagram, I think that there is the middle ground. But I also think that most pornography is, has a really specific purpose, and that purpose is not to enlighten someone or create a beautiful artistic image. It's just like so that someone can come.
And I'm not going to have any critical thought on the art world with that. That said.
Yeah. Definitely some art can be pornographic.
Yeah, true. They're super interchangeable, and I think that's like a whole other like 1 hour conversation we can have. To wrap this up, 2 things. One, this has been on my mind recently with ideas of self-expression and like how we go out in the world and represent ourselves. I grew up in Illinois, and there was a lot of normalcy around. Sounds like same with you, right? Like rules, ways of doing things. Do you think, and as I grew up and had more experiences and learned more about the world, the idea of normal really changed. How would you define what normal is?
That's a hard one. Yeah, I definitely think that, we're such a product of our surroundings, and what I think is normal now is really dictated by my like extremely liberal social circle, which is basically occupied of just like sex positive feminists. So my idea of normal is a little different. But I sort of hate the word because it is always ostracizing of certain people, and it's all, like it's the way that we allow, it's where like sort of shaming and all that stuff comes from. So I would say I just don't think that there is a normal. I think that you have to define it for yourself. This sounds like super cheesy and self-helpy, but
we all need a little shot of that. But
Yeah.
it is, yeah. I mean, I think I come to the same conclusions. I also wonder if there's, like, normal too seems to be like kind of being in balance. I've thought about that. I'm going to go down a rabbit hole in my brain with that question for myself. But I also do wonder about it. But ostracization or exclusion maybe is a better word. Normal should never be that.
Yeah, and especially when you're talking about sexuality, I think it's very dangerous to say, like, this is normal, even to say, like, being straight is normal,
Yep.
This is normal sexual behavior, because then it, especially around these sensitive topics where people already have so much insecurity, and so many people just want, you want to be normal sometimes. Sometimes you don't, but sometimes you do. You don't want to be a freak, right? You don't want to think, my sexuality, I'm a freak, and people are not going to want to be with me. So I think we're trying to, I want to expand the idea of what normal is.
Awesome.
In that realm.
I fully support you. I also have a gift for you.
Oh, cool.
It takes 2 hands, so I have to give you the microphone and step off camera in return so you can sing a song or something.
No, I'll save it. I'll spare you. Oh.
I don't know how.
Oh my God, cool.
How you're going to move with this thing.
This is not what I expect. I thought you were going to give me a sex toy, but it's like a sandwich.
It kind of is. So what this is, for everybody out there, you can kind of, but I can't tip it towards the camera, so I'm just going to do an evocative description of what this is. So at the end of every show, I present whoever I'm interviewing with a rap, because that's the name of the show. RAP stands for Women, Recipes, Art, and Process. So we've heard a little bit about your recipe today, your art, and your process. So I wanted to give you something in exchange. So I was actually brought into the Museum of Sex to be their curator of food and beverage.
Oh.
So I helped them open 2 bars. So I did all this research on aphrodisiac ingredients. And so this is made for you with some of my own research and in collaboration with Chef Alicia Walter down at Once Upon a Tart. So we were talking about it, and I was like, okay, we need figs. So figs for a long time, obviously, have been an aphrodisiac ingredient. 1, because of their verisimilitude to female genitalia. 2, because they're actually just full of like awesome vitamins and give you lots of vitality and a little bit of sugar, which always helps. Ricotta, which is this sort of like fluffy mouthfeel that kind of puts you in the mood as you're eating.
Cummy.
Yeah.
Is that an adjective that we use?
I think it could be. I did a cheese tasting class yesterday, and the instructor said, like, just add a Y to anything, and that's a descriptive.
Okay.
So you are right. And this is all wrapped in roti. That's like a very delicious, buttery, flaky bread. So
nice.
I know it's taboo for all of our figures, but there you go. And then there's a honey dipping sauce. So the whole thing you actually have to like dip and eat, and you probably have to lick it too, and have all these wonderful gestures that go around it. I have no idea how you're gonna take this to your doctor's appointment next. But we're going to figure that out off camera.
Thank you so much. I love it. I hope this changes my sex life.
Oh, guaranteed it will. It still is the way to anyone's heart at some point. Karley, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much. It was really fun.
Yeah. And we are back every Tuesdays and Thursdays in the storefront window of the DKNY shop at 420 West Broadway.